Good morning. Tara, magbasa na tayo ng ating libro. Kapwa ko Pilipino, magbasa tayo ng ating sariling history book. History of the Filipino People by Agoncillo and Guerrero. Today is 11 March 2023. History of the Filipino People, Part 6, The Third Republic. Topic number 25, the HUKBALAHAP movement. Nandito tayo sa paragraph, Roxas and the Huks. Basa. Roxas and the Huks. When it became evident that Manuel Roxas, whom the Huks accused of having been a collaborator, would run for the presidency, the Huks and the Democratic Alliance, a new party composed of intellectuals, workers, and peasants, studied the situation and its implications and decided to throw their support behind President Osmeña. Roxas, in his attempt to assure himself of the presidency and knowing the voting potential of the Huks, would Tarok and promised him almost everything if Tarok and the Huks would side with him in the coming political struggle. I am more radical than you are, you know, Roxas was reported to have told Tarok in a desperate attempt to win over the Huks to his side. Tarok, however, refused to truckle to Roxas, who was reported to be the candidate of the wealthiest man of the country. That was the beginning of Roxas' hostility to the Huks. He ravaged against them. He accused them of lawlessness and of being communist. When Roxas finally won the presidency, he instituted a campaign against the Huks. The Huks, however, succeeded in electing Tarok and other members of the Democratic Alliance to Congress. As months rolled on, the Filipino MPs and civilian guards hired by the wealthy landlords of Central Luzon to protect them and to fight the Huks made a series of raids on the Huk bastions. The result was successive skirmishes in which the civilians, Huks or non-Huks, were the victims. Killings perpetrated by both sides became daily occurrences. As a result, the countryside became a sort of no-man's land. The land was left uncultivated and hundreds of families evacuated to safer places. In the wake of these punitive expeditions, the Huks fought back with ferocity. In the wake of these punitive expeditions, the Huks fought back with ferocity. The MPs, for their part, indiscriminately shot and machine-gunned men and women suspected of being Huks. The most notorious of MP abuses was the Masico affair in Laguna, in which a group of old and young men and women were machine-gunned without any warning or investigation. It appeared later on that the murdered men and women were not descendants but innocent, peaceful citizens. Napagkamalan, guys. So, yung Masico affair in Laguna. Kawawa naman. It appeared later on that the murdered men and women were not descendants but innocent, peaceful citizens. The same wanton disregard for civil rights was exhibited by the MPs in Maliwalo, Bacolor, Pampanga. A group of men and women was holding a party at night when they were fired upon and killed by the MPs. Yet there is no evidence that these criminals in MP uniform were punished for their crimes. No wonder then that the Huks refused to come to terms with the government but continued instead to defy duly constituted authorities. Significant too was Rojas' act in masterminding the unseating of Tarok and the other members of Democratic Alliance who had been elected to Congress. Tarok and his companions were charged with poll frauds in Pampanga and Nueva Ecija. Although the charge of fraud was not conclusive, Tarok and his companions were unseated. The parity amendment was then pushed through Congress. Tarok, for his part, returned to his people and led them in the struggle against what he termed injustices committed against the peasants. The Pacification Campaign. Tarok and other peasant leaders, in their desire to make the countryside safe, cooperated with President Rojas in the campaign of pacification. Tarok, Juan Peleo, and Mateo Del Castillo went from barrio to barrio to explain to their followers the importance of peace and order in national rehabilitation and reconstruction. It was during this pacification campaign that Tarok and Del Castillo received an intelligence report that they would be liquidated by their enemies, among whom were allegedly high government officials. The two leaders, instead of proceeding to their destinations, hid and waited for results. On August 24, 1946, Juan Filio, the peasant leader of Nueva Ecija, who did not receive the warning on time while in the company of MPs who were supposed to protect him in his pacification campaign, was kidnapped right under the very noses of his MP guards and killed. The kidnapping and murder of Filio, followed by the killing of labor leader Jose Joven, led Tarok and his men to believe that the Rojas administration, backed up by wealthy men and landlords, was bent on liquidating the movement of the masses. On August 29, he wrote a stinging letter to Rojas practically accusing the latter of instigating the campaigns against the peaceful Huks. Rojas answered by accusing the Huks of lawlessness. The kidnapping of Filio in front of the MP guards who were supposed to give him protection and the failure of the government to bring the culprits to justice made some people believe, rightly or wrongly, that some high government officials had something to do with the kidnapping and killing of Filio and Joven. It was also believed that the purpose in its instance was to deprive the peasants of leadership in order to make it easy for the government to deal with them. Grabe yung patayan ng araw, no? Outlawing of the Huks. The sharp and constant fighting between the Huks on one hand and the MPs and civilian guards on the other wrought havoc on the agricultural economy of Central Luzon. The people placed in the crossfire of two contending forces lived in fear and hunger. Seasonal harvests increased tremendously, resulting in the spiraling of the prices of commodities. For 2 years, the Rojas administration tried its best to quell the Huk dissidents, to no avail. It seemed that the people were behind the Huks and were prepared to give aid and comfort to their leaders. One MP report would say that Tarok was within the clutches of the government forces. The following day, the newspaper reports would say that Tarok was nowhere to be found. Tens of millions of pesos were spent to hunt down Tarok, but the millions and the MPs together failed to track down even the shadow of the peasant leader. Desperate because the condition of peace and order was giving his administration a bad reputation, what with the rampant graft and corruption, President Rojas issued a proclamation on March 6, 1948 declaring the HUKBALAHAP and the Pambansang Kaisahan ng mga Magbubukid, which was reorganized after the war by Mateo del Castillo, was illegal associations organized and maintained to commit acts of sedition and other crimes for the purpose of overthrowing our present government under the Constitution. Following this declaration, he ordered the arrest of all members of the two outlawed organizations. Rojas' declaration, though not having any force of law, was nevertheless a clear-cut statement of national policy. Henceforth, Anybody having any connection with the Huks was considered an enemy of the government and therefore liable to be arrested and imprisoned. The proclamation may have been issued in good faith, but its effect on many people was depressing. Indiscriminate arrest and killings were made in the name of peace and order and democratic way of life. In Manila, the MPs and the civilian guards became the laughingstock of the intellectuals and the masses. The Amnesty Proclamation. Roxas, whom the Huks labeled as the willing tool of American and Filipino vested interests, died at Clarkfield, an American territory, in April 1948. The first namatay. Wait lang guys The Amnesty Proclamation. Roxas, whom the Huks labeled as the willing tool of American and Filipino vested interests, died at Clarkfield, an American territory, in April 1948. Parang, okay. The first task of Elpidio Quirino as successor, may naisip lang kasi ako The first task of Elpidio Quirino as successor of Roxas was, as he stated, establishment of peace and order so that his administration could proceed with economic mobilization and the restoration of the people's faith and confidence in the government. Quirino knew that the people had lost their faith and confidence in the government not only because of the rampant graft and corruption, but because of the loss of civil liberties in many parts of the country. Ang naisip ko kasi, guys, di ba nga, nag-ano to na si Roxas ng nag-speech siya ng loyalty sa American. Tapos, kinagabihan parang hindi na nagising to Parang yung una-una nating nabasa, diba? Natandaan niyo. Tinanong Parang atake yata to. Kaya namatay. Okay, ulit tayo. As a first step, asaan na ba ako? Ulitin ko na lang ulit. The first task of Elpidio Quirino as successor of Roxas was, as he stated, establishment of peace and order so that his administration could proceed with economic mobilization and the restoration of the people's faith and confidence in the government. Quirino knew that the people had lost their faith and confidence in the government not only because of the rampant graft and corruption, but because of the loss of civil liberties in many parts of the country. As a first step toward the realization of the first objective, Quirino sent his brother, former Judge Antonio Quirino, to the fold to contact Tarok in order to know what the Huks wanted. Through the representatives of the Manila Chronicle, I.P. Solyonco, and SOLIONGCO, Solyonco, and a photographer. The meeting with Tarok and his men was arranged. Judge Guerrero and I.P. Solyonco met Tarok on June 6 at a barrio between the towns of San Miguel and Baliwag, Bulacan. The negotiations were kept strictly secret, for there were forces, as Judge Guerrero later on admitted in a letter to Tarok, that did not want any understanding with the Huks. On June 21, Tarok flew to Manila. On the same day, in the presence of Tarok at Malacanang, President Quirino issued a proclamation granting amnesty to all leaders and members of the HUKBALAHAP and the PKM. Amnesty was absolute and covered crimes of rebellion, sedition, illegal association, assault, resistance, and disobedience to persons in authority. On the other hand, the Huks agreed to present their arms to the duly constituted authority within a period of 50 days following the grant of amnesty. Bukas na itong the breakdown of amnesty, guys. Bye everyone. God bless.